All right, this is part of a six-part series. You can do separately or one at a time, called Creative Job Search. And the other components of it are the interview, social media, including LinkedIn, Job Search Over 50, which has helpful hints for anyone. And then the beginning is career planning and preparing for the job search and identifying your skills about the applications and the portfolio. We are going to talk about the application, which is important. Their resume is part of the application process. It is a very important part. Keep in mind that the sole purpose of your resume, the only reason it exists, is to get you an interview. That whatever you present in your resume, its job is to help you get an interview. That's the purpose of the resume. It supplements the application because most application systems now ask you to upload a resume. Even if you're going to be a cashier at Cub, um, it's it's part of the application system. All right. What is important about the application? One of the things that's talked about in one of the previous sessions is to get organized, right? You need to keep good records. You need to read the instructions carefully for the resume, and you need to fill it out completely. You can think of the application as the first step in the job process, because the job search process, because if you cannot fill out an application correctly, you're not going to get called back from an interview. It's the first screening step. A lot of times applications are timed. You only are allowed so much time to fill them out, and then they end, and everything you've done is no longer available or there. It's another part of the screening process. It's very, very important to be organized. And that includes having information ready and available so you don't have to look it up. In your resume, you list where you worked and how long you worked there. But in an application, you might have to have an address. You might have to have the supervisor's name. You might have to have a contact information. You might need to know how much you made. Um, so you need to have a document with you that has all that information. Also, most job sites, most company jobs, application job sites, ask you to make an account, to register. So that means you have to have a username, you have to have a password, you have to have whatever email you use for them to send you information. So if you do not have a way to have that stuff organized, you will be in trouble if you want to go back to that site and apply for another job. The state of Minnesota has a dashboard. We'll talk about that question in a minute. Um, on the state of Minnesota website, they have a dashboard where you can go back and see the jobs that you've applied for and where you are, what's the status of your application. It will be submitted, under consideration, um, no longer considered. And if you remember your password and your username, you can get back to that and see that information, which will help you in your application process. I cannot overemphasize how important it is to keep good records, and to read the instructions carefully. Even if you've done 100 applications and you think you know what you're doing, each job site has a little different spin on it. And so they're checking to see if you can follow directions. They're checking to see if you fill out everything completely. So make sure that you take the time and read all the instructions carefully and fill it out completely. The resume. What's important about the resume? Somebody asked, right, someone just said 10 years is generally good. Right, 10 to 15 years is appropriate. If you have an experience that's older than 15 years, but is relevant to the job that you're applying for, there are ways of handling that, and we'll talk about that. So if you were on the last job for 10 years, that's fine. You might want to go back 15 to show that you worked at more than one place. But there's this acronym or these points about you include only relevant information. So what is relevant information? Relevant information is the information. We'll talk about gaps in employment, and I'll write it down so I don't forget. Relevant information is what the job posting was asking you for. My suggestion, and especially if you have a couple decades in the work and with work, is to have a master resume. And a master resume is where you list all your jobs going back 10, 15 years, or 20 if you want, and list every single thing that you feel is an accomplishment under each job. Just sit down with your favorite beverage, some snacks, and you don't even have to plop in complete sentences, because as you're thinking about what you did in one job, you might remember something you did in another job. Just put in keywords, put in general statements. Don't worry about punctuation, spelling, or grammar. And then after you've exhausted that, then go back and correct spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Have somebody read that. And it's okay if it goes to 5 or 6 pages. You will have the hard work of a resume done, right? And then when you find a job posting that you want to apply for, copy your master, which is the beauty of word processing, and delete everything that's not relevant to that job posting. One of the not so cool things about showing how awesome you are is that you might not get an interview because they're not worried that you can't do the job. They're worried that you'll get bored. They'll worry that you'll leave after a couple months when you find a job that uses all your skills. Your resume just needs to show how you meet the requirements and the preferred requirements in the job posting. It doesn't need to show everything that you're capable of, and that's okay. It needs to be an evidence of your skills, so it needs to have accomplishment statements. And we will talk about that. Your bullet points need to answer the question, so what? You know, if you're working in customer service and you're a receptionist for a medical organization and you say, answer the phones and schedule appointments for clients, I want to know how many calls you got a day approximately, and you successfully scheduled appointments for clients or patients. You need to use adverb or adjectives, and if you can, numbers are really good. Percentages, how much of something is increased or decreased, is important. More than half of your bullet points should answer the question, so what? You did this, so what? Because they're looking for return on investment. What you did for a previous employer is a good indication of what you can do for them. So, is there a perfect resume? There are many different strategies, and we're just providing best practices, right? The bottom line is you need to be comfortable with what you have in your resume because it's selling you, right? You have to think of yourself as that chocolate bar, that $5 chocolate bar that you have to pick which one you want. And how do you make that decision, right? So what you're doing is selling yourself, but you have to be comfortable. I don't know, does anybody out there say yes or no in the chat? Do you enjoy looking for a job? Is this a fun activity? Yes or no if you think it's a fun activity. Right. So it's not something that you want to repeat often, right? You don't want to be doing this every couple of years. And so that means that you want to use the tools of finding a job to find a good fit. And your resume is that first step, right? You can Google perfect resume, right? Or use whatever search engine you use, and you'll get thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of suggestions. Some of them will contradict. Is it an objective statement? Is it a professional summary? Do I include skills? Are they on the top of the resume or the bottom of the resume? It is what works, and in some professions, there's different preferred practices, and you need to be aware of that. But the bottom line is what you're doing is not working, then you change it. Also, there is no substitute for having spelling errors, having grammatical errors, having mistakes in tenses of your verbs, right? You need to have that's a common factor. Resumes are thrown away even if you're the perfect applicant, if there's any punctuation, spelling, or grammar errors, right? That's just a sign of you not being detailed or orientated or not caring enough to check those. And my suggestion is always have at least one or two eyes look at your resume. All right, so somebody came up with this little, I forget what these are called, but a way of remembering, right? A resume is a review of your qualifications, and it should only address the qualifications that they're asking for. It's only essential information. It's skill-based. They're hiring you for what you can do. It's good to try to make it unique. What makes you special? If I have two candidates that have the same qualifications, why should I hire you? Marketing, we've already talked about. It's an effective way of getting noticed, and it's specifically targeted to each job. Okay, so I will talk about AI. I have an example to share when we get there. And specifically target to each job doesn't mean you need a new resume for each job posting. That's where the master resume comes in. You still are who you are. You still have the skills and experiences that make you who you are. And so that doesn't change. That stays the same. What changes is the information that you put on the resume that you apply for each job. And it also has to do with language. So you might want to think about the posting as in a foreign language. They might say client, and you might say in your master resume customer. They might say coordinate, and they might say manage, right? Or you might say manage. So you want to use their language because a lot of companies use an algorithm, an applicant tracking system that screens for keywords. And the keywords are the words in the posting. There's nothing mystical about it. It's the words in the posting. So if they say a skill is to be able to manage an Excel spreadsheet, you won't say design an Excel spreadsheet and execute the functions. You will say manage in your bullet points on your resume. Right? You want to keep it brief. 2 pages is normally the goal of a resume, right? Uh, I have learned recently within the last 6 months or so that for the state of Minnesota, it doesn't matter how long it is. It can be more than 2 pages. For someone who's always been working with a 2-page resume, that's kind of a challenge. But that's not someplace where you have to hold back. But most businesses ask you to keep it to 2 pages. It's not a complete history, it's just an overview. It's the only function, the only function of your resume is to get you an interview. And so whatever you need to do to get the interview. I know, Jennifer, that there was a question about gap. Are there any questions, other questions before we go on to the next slide?
Um, yes, there was an option or questions. I think mostly the questions were pretty much the same. One was about the gaps, and then the other two were about how far do you go back if you in years if you worked your last job for 15 or plus years. So 1742 were the other years that they said that they worked with their last job.
Right, so 10 to 15 years is significant, is sufficient. If you've worked at the same job for that long, then you have one job and you might have more than 5 bullet points then to talk about your accomplishment. Maybe a way of organizing your resume would be if you had different areas that you worked in, put those, it would be we'll talk about a skill-based resume. You could make it kind of that way. If you had different titles in the company, the header would be the company, and then underneath it would be your different titles that you had. If you have gaps, you can explain part of the gap in the summary very briefly in the professional summary, and we'll show that where that is, or you can do it also, or I would also do it in the cover letter. And you could, depending on why you had that gap, if it was to care for a relative, it could be caregiver, and just state that you did that. Nowadays, people are more understanding of that. If you took off to be a mother, you had a child, that's caregiver. There are other terms for it. We can deal with that. You have available to you an incredible resource, the career force. So no matter where you are in the state, there's a career force. And the staff there is awesome. They know what they're talking about. They know how to answer those questions. And each gap, or each being at a place for 17 or 20 years, has a little bit different nuances. So call your career force. Reach out to them and make an appointment with one of the people who work there, and they will help you figure this out on your resume. They're wonderful people. I have not met anybody at any of the other career force centers that are not awesome and don't know what they're talking about. And if they don't know, then they find somebody who can. The depth of experience and knowledge is remarkable. So things like gap and being someplace since the beginning of time, they each have a different nuance to it. So it's best because this is your resume, this is projecting you to talk to somebody and figure out the nuances of presenting that to the best ability. Any other questions I missed?
Some just came in. One asked, how do you show a year off due to severance?
Okay. So that again, I would check with your career force to do that. It depends on why you got the severance and what you did with that time off. So that's another very nuanced thing. Anything else?
Would any algorithms discard longer resumes or discard for another formatting reason?
So there are reasons why they're discarded, but a longer resume would not be rejected. It just might not be read. You have to understand that people spend less than half a minute reading your resume to begin with. So when they're going through the process of elimination, they do not spend a lot of time. Then when it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever decluttered, you have the yes, no, maybe pile. If you get 100 resumes for one job, you have a yes, no, and maybe pile. The no, a quick scan says, nope, this won't work. The maybe, there might be something, and then they go back to them. But the initial read of resumes is incredibly short, given all the angst and time that people put into writing them. This is following the eyes of a recruiter reading a resume. It spends a lot of time on the top 1/3. It spends time looking at the education, if that's important for the job. If you notice this big type chunk here on the bottom, there was no time spent there. No eye movement, right? Because it's just too much to read. One of the basic premises of setting up your resume is to set it up for speedy reading. That's that's what people do. That's what you need to do when you set up your resume. And you need to do things that will help do that. You have to make it essentially scannable. Using bold or capital letters to highlight information, but you need to avoid italics, underlining, borders, lines across the page, text boxes, graphics, even color. It can screw up some of the applicant tracking systems. They become more and more sophisticated. So many of them are not bothered by those things, but I wouldn't take the chance. An italic font, if you italicize your font, it's just harder to read. There's no reason to italicize anything on your font, on your resume. If you need to do caps or do small caps, I can show you how to do that, but there's no reason to italicize anything on your resume. And I know that text and graphics make it fun to, and it makes it more personable, but there are other ways of doing that. You also want to either choose a font that is a universal font or always submit a PDF. Because if you use some creative, fun font, their system might not be able to read it and it will convert it to whatever font it sees it as. And that might move, that will affect your spacing, what's shown on a page, how it's organized. So if you want to use a fun font, make a PDF and submit that. And I can show you how to do that in Word if necessary. So some basics. I think we missed one. Sorry, we missed one. All right. So you have to be positive and honest. You need to focus on accomplishments and you need to target for each position. So we've talked about that. And many people of a certain age worry about overqualified. That's not a target, that's not a qualification, and that can be sidestepped by only addressing what is asked for in the job posting. And it can be also dealt with, instead of saying 25 years of experience, you can say 10 plus. It's not a lie. It addresses that issue of your experience. It's important to be honest and positive. Once you submit the application, once you submit your resume, it becomes a legally binding document. If you are hired and found to have lied on anything on your resume, you can be fired without cause. A colleague of ours worked at a private company for many, many years, and somebody who was hired after a year, and this person within that year had been a stellar employee, exceeded goals, punctual, great teammate, just a dream employee, was found to have have lied on his resume. They were fired point blank, no questions asked. And then the company went back to everyone that had been hired in the last 10 years and combed with a fine-tooth comb all of their resumes to make sure everything they said was true. Never lie. Never lie on a resume. Always, always be positive. Don't throw anybody under the bus. Don't throw a previous employer, employee, a coworker, anyone under the bus. Don't say I accomplished this even though this was going on. The company was in foreclosure and I accomplished this. You never want to use anything negative on your resume, and you always, always want to be totally honest. Does somebody have a question? I just saw something flash.
So there was a question asking about what would be the best fonts to use for your resumes.
And somebody put them up. I saw someone answer that question.
One person said Times New Roman. I did state that Arial, Cambria, and Times New Roman are usually preferred. Any kind of easy font to read.
Yeah, and so you don't want to go lower than 10 points in your font. 12 is better.
Yes.
And you want decent margins. So in order to get 2 pages, if you do a 1/4 inch margin all around and use 8-point type, you've not made your resume easy to read. You want at least 1/2 inch margins all around. And I tend to put a 3/4 of an inch on a bottom. It just makes it visually look better. And you don't want anything lower than 11, and 12 is even better. You want to use white space. So, and that's what a margin gives you, is white space. And if you don't recall the exact dates, month and year that you worked at a job, you can look at your tax returns, or you can call the HR department at your former employer if you think they will be helpful. They will have a record of that. And sometimes if that can't be found out, most applications, there's a box where you fill in your bullet points. You can put on the bottom that dates listed, employment dates listed are approximate. So that means if you're a week off or 2 weeks off, you're covered yourself because you're saying that they're approximate. Part of the basics is choosing the format. The top is the most valuable, include white space, and then we've already talked about error, 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 proofread, edit, 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 edit. We become myopic, which means that we don't see something that's always there. And so reading your resume over and over and over again to catch errors, you're not going to catch them after a while. And that's why you need to have somebody else look at it. Somebody who has some knowledge of grammar and spelling and word usage, because you could use spell check won't catch the correct spelling of the wrong word in a sentence. right? You could say or you could say O-R-E, and spell check won't check that. There is one way that you can start checking on your own. So here's a resume in Word. And there is the ability in, and I'm gonna move it over for a minute. In the search bar, if you say read out loud. Pressure environment and attention to detail. Selected. So I searched in the search bar, read out loud, and you get this toolbar, and then I can put the cursor here and start it. Summary statement. Experienced customer service and call center representative for retail-oriented companies as well as companies tasked with. So that's a great way to do an initial check, because as it's being read to you, you'll catch verb tenses that might not be correct, the wrong words, awkward sentences. It's a really great tool that's part of Word. Anybody used that before? Has anybody used that? Say yes or no in the chat. I don't know are people who out there is using Google Docs instead of Word? Is anybody using Google Docs? You can just say yes. I don't know if that feature is there. I should probably investigate that. Google Docs doesn't have the same breadth of, it does. Cool, thank you. Google Docs does allow you to read out loud. Cool. It's a great tool, folks. One worth using. All right, so resumes can be formatted in a variety of ways. There's chronological. My suggestion is to always have a I'll show it again, yeah, after I finish the slide. You should always have a chronological resume because it loads easier in the applicant tracking system. A functional or skill-based resume is where instead of listing your jobs from newest to oldest, you have chunks for different skills and list how you accomplish those skills. And then at the end, you might have your employment history and then a combination. So a combination is both a chronological and function. No, you use whatever format works best for you. No matter what format you use, remember it to target to the job. And use whatever best tells your story. And a functional resume would be a great resume to use if you've been only at one employer for the largest chunk of your work life, because you could say the employer up on top, and then you could do the different skill sets and how you accomplished different tasks within that skill set. So I'll bring back. So here's a Word doc, and in the search engine, if you say read out loud, then it comes up. Oh, I got rid of it. Okay, read out. The current and prospective Medicare health insurance. And then you put the cursor wherever you want to start, and it will do it. I want you to notice this double blue line. That means based on Microsoft's grammar guide, this should be a hyphenated word. It's always important to look through your resume and figure out what those lines are telling you. Most of the time they're correct. So let's look at a chronological resume. Chronological resume has a summary. It can be an objective statement, a professional summary, just a summary. This is just within 3 short sentences, gives an overview of who you are and what makes you different. It does not necessarily rehash what is below. And then you can list your skills. Those skills that you list are based on what's posted in the job posting. If you have a skill outside of that job posting and it's not required or preferred, you do not need to list it. They do not need to know. It might be a great surprise if they hire you, if they do it. So yeah, so you can check that. It's very important that you don't list extra stuff, especially if you're of a certain age. That would add to the frustration of overqualified. When you list your employment dates, you need to have a month. Years are not enough. If you're applying for the state or other government agencies, you need to have the day also. The state of Minnesota's policy is if you work from May to October, so May 2020 to October 2022, what they do is they give you credit for the very last day of May. You work the very last day of May to the very first day in October. If one of the qualifications for the job is 5 years, and you are 2 months short, but not in actual, but because you don't put in the date, your resume will not be considered. So definitely for the state of Minnesota and for government agencies generally, put the date there. You do not need your address anymore on resumes. Nobody sends you anything in the mail. It's always done email. You can put in your city, state if you want. I would not put in the zip code. People still make generalization judgments by zip codes, different zip codes in different cities. I would not give them that piece of information. Jennifer?
So we had a question that came earlier, and I just kind of waited until you got to this point,
Okay.
Sandra. So he had mentioned that he has these 3 jobs that are really relevant to his job search right now. But he is wondering if he should remove the oldest job to hide how old he is.
So that can go either way. If it has relevant skills that are important to the job, you could put it, or you could put relevant professional experience and then have bullet points as that you would have under that job, but not give it a year. And that way those skills would be listed on your resume and would help you get through the applicant tracking system.
And then there was another question that came up asking, should your summary talk about your skill or only about what you are seeking?
It should talk about what makes you unique and not rehashing the skills that are listed in the resume. You might want to highlight your years of experience if that's an important part of the job posting. Yes, and this is a one-page example, but that's just so we can get it on the slide. It can be 2 pages. You will note that there are no dates for the education, right? And because this individual, Robert, went to a tech type training, it has his high school. If you have an undergraduate degree, you do not list high school. because you can get into the college unless you have a GED or a diploma, right? And you do not need dates unless you've just graduated from college. Because that's another way people figure out how old you are is the graduation dates from an institution. You might also, depending on where you are in your life, have training programs. So this could be education and training programs, or you could have training programs separately from it. This is a functional resume. It just lists accomplishments and education and training. This is not a resume that I would upload into an applicant tracking system because they want to know where you worked and when you worked there and how to get a hold of a supervisor if they want to. This is a combination. So this lists your employment history, but it focuses on your application. Right. And so applications can ask for education dates, and you can have that on your piece of paper that you have with all your information. Most applicant tracking systems will pull information from your resume that you upload, fill out their little boxes, and give you a chance to go through them and edit them. So that's where you fill in information that you do not have on your resume, like dates, supervisor names, uh, different bits of information. That's also where you put in other information that might be asked for. And if you notice, there's this dotted purple line under evaluations. There should be a comma there because right now the accepted format is the Oxford comma. And so that would want a comma. That's why that's there. So there are basic resume parts, no matter what the resume is. And one of them is your name, right? You don't need city and state. That's totally acceptable. Do not put on your LinkedIn profile URL if it's not up to date. If you're not proud of it, if you haven't recently fixed it, or you're not somewhat maybe weekly doing something on it, it is important for job seekers over a certain age because it's a way to make sure that you're not technology phobic. Do you have a photo there? Did you change the background banner so it's not the generic? Can you change your URL? Your URL should not have numbers in it. There's a way of changing that, and they talk about that in the social media session of this creative job search, or you can ask at your local career force how to do that. Then it has an objective, or you can combine these two. You don't need to specifically say that you want to be a mechanical engineer. You can roll that into the summary. And then it has your professional experience, which is chronological from most recent to the most past. And it should have month at the bare minimum, but it's also good to do date. And then it has each experience has bullet points that should be accomplishment statements. And then it has your education. And that can include certifications. You might have somebody who's applied for a job 20 years ago and say, oh, you need volunteer experience on there. That's no longer necessary. It's no longer necessary to say hobbies. Sometimes that would be, people will find that as a distraction. Sometimes that gives away information about you that people aren't legally able to ask. So you want to be brief. The purpose of the resume is to get you a job, right? So whatever you need to do to be brief. It could be military experience. Many jobs give you extra credit, extra points for the military experience. You don't really need volunteer information, only if it's relevant for the job. Yep, I would definitely put it if it's relevant for the job. Leadership experience, you could add that. One of my things that I would add is that I went through the Emerging Leadership Program here at the state. Professional membership, if it's germane, if it's relates to the job. Any rewards or recognition, that would be good to add to the job, add to the resume. The important part of the resume, the part that sells you, is the bullet points under your professional experience. And you need to use action words. You need to be detailed, and you need to have outcome or results. You need to answer the question, so what? Right? You need to be able to answer that question. So here, if you had one of these statements on your resume, how would you make it an accomplishment statement? Pick one and put in the chat how you would make that an accomplishment statement. Is there things in the chat I didn't see? People, okay, here we go. Right, okay. Because we're a little short on time, I'm gonna just give you the answer. So here are suggestions. It's not the only way, but manage daily inventory of over 1,000 classifications of medical supplies. So that tells me you did it every day. This was the amount and what they were. Grew customer base from 0 to 70 within 2 months. By how did you do that? You efficiently use cold calling techniques. All right, so I'm going to use this resume in all right, so this is Chat GPT. So first what I'm going to do is, if you have Word and you do Control A, that highlights everything. And then if you can do Control C, that copies it. All right, so now we're going to go to Chat GPT, and I'm going to say, rewrite resume with accomplishment statements under each experience. And then I'm going to do Control V and paste the resume. Never, ever, 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 ever use anything directly from ChatGPT. It has a voice, it has a personality, and if you show up at an interview and do not have that voice or personality, they will know. People are becoming very savvy about ChatGPT. Also, there's spelling and grammar and other mistakes within it, and it also might not reflect you. So here it says maintaining 98% customer satisfaction rate. Your rate might be different, right? It just put that in there to show what it can do, right? But it's a great way to maybe get a different terminology, use different words. And then I could say, write a shorter summary statement. So anything you do within this chat is like having a dialogue with another person. They're still there, they still remember what's there. This double square here is copy, but when you do that, you don't get the formatting. So if you want to keep the formatting, you have to highlight it and then do again Control C to copy it, go to a Word document. So if I want to do a new document and do Control Paste, and it will be there. It's very slick. You should never just use ChatGPT. The next thing we're going to talk about very briefly is cover letters. So I could ask, write a generic cover letter for using this resume. There are many, many other programs that are doing the same thing. And this is the free version of ChatGPT. So this is way too long of a cover letter. So I would say shorten cover letter. You want to make sure, though, that the cover letter is addressed to the job that you're applying for, and you don't need all this header stuff with your name and the company's name. It's all going to be emailed anyway, and this just takes up room. Are there questions in the chat about that?
Not regarding the cover letters so far, but there was questions about the length of resumes and if having like more than one page is
Yeah,
okay.
Two pages are totally acceptable. You don't want to go further than that, but you always want to keep in mind white space. And please don't ever skip the cover letter. I worked at, you can just address the cover letter to the hiring manager if you don't have a name. I worked at Lehigh Harris, which was an outplacement firm that companies like Target, Ecolab contracted with to help their laid off employees find jobs, mostly upper level, but they started helping lower level people. We had a hiring panel with HR people from multiple companies. 50% of them never read a cover letter, but noted it was there. It was always used when there were two candidates that were equal. It just shows that you're willing to jump through hoops. Jennifer?
Who do you address the cover letter to when you aren't given a name?
You have to say, dear hiring manager. Don't say to whom it may concern.
And then what is this acceptable cover letter length?
1 page with white space. Again, decent margins, short paragraphs. Any sentence that is long, so long that when I get to the end, I don't remember the first part. It's not good. It's not War and Peace. It's not something written by Dostoevsky. It's a very short, think of romance novels, short, sweet sentences that move the plot along, right? That looks good. Or hiring team, yep. All right. So the cover letter states your intent and lists the name of the job that you're applying for, indicates why you're interested, explains how you're the match, and includes a thank you. There is a page on careerforcemn.com that talks about cover letters, gives you examples of cover letters, talks in detail about what it should contain. And then please contact the Career Force about your resume for a resume review. They can help you if you're transitioning from one job to another. Call us. We're here to help. We love to interact with people. That's why we went into the field. That's why we have our jobs. Reach out. They're really great people that work there. Thank you very much. We have some time left.
So there was one question that we missed.
Okay.
It would, it had asked, like during the application, it typically asks if you have a disability, and should they answer that or not.
It depends. Legally, they're not allowed to use that against you. It's totally up to you whether you want to do that or not. Totally up to you. I would like you to put in the chat one thing you learned today, one thing that you didn't know about resumes, that you learned.
A lot of them sounds like it's chat GPT.
Cool.
Good.
Yeah, and if you live out in an area that it will take you an hour to get the Career Force Center, we do help people virtually, right? We do. It's even better to review a resume most of the time virtually, because then it can be up on the screen and everybody can see what's going on. Um, so don't let distance be a hindrance. Yeah, cool. Any last minute questions or comments?
Not that I can see. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming today, everyone. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, and you know what? You're a star. You're gonna do it. You're gonna land that job, and your resume is the first step.
Yes, yes. Good
Enjoy.
luck. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.